CEO Evelyn Chase spent over $100 million. The planet's top specialists reviewed her case. The absolute most expensive experimental treatments in the world had been administered inside a private suite on the 14th floor of her very own building. And yet, month after month, she kept getting weaker. Her hands shook violently when nobody else was looking. Her vision blurred on mornings. Those expensive treatments were supposed to be helping. Yet not one highly paid expert in her medical army stopped to ask why she was actually getting worse. Only one single man noticed. He was pushing a mop cart down the hall when he spotted her hands resting quietly on the infusion chair's armrest. And what he saw changed everything. Isaac Calloway left his small apartment at 5:45 daily. He scrambled 2 eggs and packed a thermos of black coffee. Then he walked his 7-year-old daughter Grace 3 blocks to the Maple Street Center, before turning back to catch the subway. It was a steady routine worn smooth by daily repetition. He moved through it all with the quiet efficiency of a guy who had learned never to waste a single thing. Not time, not energy, and definitely not hope. Grace always slipped something into his jacket pocket right before he left. Most mornings it was a folded drawing. But this particular Tuesday she pressed a small paper square into his hand at the gate saying, without even looking up from her backpack, "It's you fixing people, Dad." He slowly unfolded it on the train. A crayon drawing of a gray-clothed figure, holding what looked like a wrench and a stethoscope, standing beside a really tall building with countless windows. He folded it up carefully, sliding it right into his chest pocket over his heart. Let's step into his world. The 14th floor of Nexivar Corporation hardly looked like a place for a simple janitor. Pale marble covered the hallways, lit brightly by recessed LED panels that absolutely never flickered. The air smelled clinical, sterile, and incredibly expensive. It was the distinct smell of a facility maintained not for function, but mainly for the illusion of safety. Isaac was assigned there 9 months ago, passing a background check that his direct supervisor claimed was way more thorough than any this building had ever run before. They needed someone totally reliable, a guy with a spotless record. Isaac's record was perfectly clean because after his wife Margaret passed away, he completely stopped doing the one professional thing he actually cared about. A man without ambition rarely causes trouble. He had worked as a licensed emergency medical tech for 6 years. He pulled double shifts back then, because Margaret was attending grad school and they needed the money. He was genuinely good at his job, though never in a famous way, but in that quiet, observant way that actually keeps people alive inside an ambulance at 2 in the morning. When Margaret fell ill, he fully trusted the healthcare system that employed him. He blindly trusted the diagnoses, the fancy specialists, and the medical protocols. He sat quietly in waiting rooms, nodding along at explanations he did not completely grasp, mostly because the doctors talking had framed degrees on their walls and heavy authority in their voices. He watched helplessly as his wife deteriorated for 18 painful months. And when she was finally gone, here's the tragic part. He dropped his medical certification without a single word, taking a basic job that paid the bills and demanded zero emotional investment. He overheard the floor nurses talking. Picture this with me, a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks into autumn. I was replacing the liner in the biohazard bin near the corridor junction. Working quietly like always, and those nurses' voices carried right to my ears. 19th treatment this month, one of them murmured. And her latest labs came back worse than the 16th. A pause, doctor. Hale keeps insisting it is adjustment response. Another pause, much longer. I have been doing this 12 years and never seen an adjustment response look like that. I kept moving, tied off the liner, sealed the trash bag tight, and stepped into the hallway. But deep down, my gut had gone completely still. That same cold stillness I used to feel in the ambulance, whenever a patient's presentation totally contradicted their chart. I shot a quick glance through the narrow glass panel in the treatment room door. The woman sitting inside was Evelyn Chase. I knew exactly who she was. Everyone in this entire building knew her name. She sat in that infusion chair with the rigid, straight-backed posture of someone who trained herself to never look weak or diminished inside a professional space. She wore a slate-colored blazer, her dark hair pulled back perfectly tight. From where I stood, she looked like a wealthy CEO conducting a silent, bitter negotiation with her own IV line. But look closely, her hands rested on her thighs. And even through that thick glass, I noticed the fingers on her right hand were not fully relaxed at all. They betrayed a subtle tension she desperately tried to hide. I saw it clearly, the way my medic eyes always caught things before I stopped looking. I spotted those faint white lines right across the base of her fingernails. I shoved my cleaning cart forward without stopping. But that haunting image stayed with me. Evelyn Chase took over the entire Nexavar Corporation at 24. Just 2 years after her father got diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. 16 months after he begged her to drop out of medical school, right when she finished year 2. She never went back for her degree. She mastered a totally different curriculum instead: quarterly earnings calls, dense regulatory filings, aggressive acquisition strategies. Running a medical giant whose whole value relied on healing sick people that the board would never actually meet. And she was phenomenal at it. She was incredibly precise and unsentimental in boardrooms. Industry analysts covering Nexavar quickly learned they should never underestimate the quiet woman sitting at the head of the table. Her old man from the private care facility where he lived now tracked every quarterly earnings report on a tablet and always texted her the exact same message afterward. Your grandfather would have been so proud. She never told him how utterly exhausted she felt. She refused to share useless details if nothing could actually be done to fix the problem. I watched her present third quarter projections that Thursday morning without a single tremor in her voice. Logan Hargrove, her chief financial officer, sat to her left, taking notes like a guy who knew exactly when to fake diligence. Now consider Dr. Dominic Hale, parked at the table's far end, acting as the corporation's highly paid chief medical advisor. Present just like he always was. You and I both see the trap, treating the CEO while also advising the board on their health expenditures. Picture the doctor, 57, silver-haired. He held degrees from 3 of the nation's elite medical schools. He walked with that arrogant ease of a powerful man who never ever expected to be questioned by anyone beneath his pay grade. Once the meeting wrapped and the boardroom completely emptied out, Evelyn headed straight to her private treatment suite down the 14th floor hallway. Dominic Hale was waiting. He stood by the prep counter, flashing that familiar practiced smile. Perfectly measured, warm, projecting absolute confidence while masking the ego. The Zurich protocol, he announced, holding up a sealed intravenous bag. The next phase. We should start seeing real progress in the coming weeks. Evelyn sank into the medical chair. She'd heard some version of that promise 19 times before, and she'd signed away over $100 million for it. She watched the clear liquid flow through the plastic tube. Dr. Hale, she asked, why do I keep feeling worse instead of better? He didn't blink, these guys never do. Adjustment response, he replied. Your system is simply recalibrating at a cellular level. The exhaustion, the nerve sensitivity, those just prove the therapy is hitting the right pathways. It feels like a decline because healing is never linear. She just stared out the glass. The glowing city below was bright, but that low autumn sunlight falling through the window simply couldn't reach her. She wondered, not for the very first time, how a tower packed with elite medical experts hadn't managed to give her a single honest answer about her health. Her father built the Nexavar Corporation deeply believing in the science. She only kept the healthcare company running because she had no real reason to let it fold. You and I see the trap here. She never once considered that the expensive miracle cure was exactly what was poisoning her. A wet mop head suddenly slid into her line of peripheral vision. It was just Isaac Calloway working his usual cleaning route. She barely noticed the janitor, just a quick, assessing glance at the help before completely dismissing him from her brilliant mind. He kept his movements highly efficient. He never even looked up. She simply turned her tired eyes back outside. But Isaac didn't look up because his sharp eyes were locked on her hands. During his 6 years as an emergency medic, he learned bodies always confess the dark truth, even when patients won't speak. He learned to read physical symptoms the way a master carpenter reads wood grain. Not by staring at one little thing, but by catching the entire medical puzzle instantly. And in the 3 brief seconds he let himself observe the billionaire, His trained eyes caught this exact detail. Those strange white horizontal lines across Evelyn's fingernails weren't just an isolated random fluke. There were 3 distinct parallel stripes, perfectly spaced and sharply defined. This wasn't some minor trauma or a simple lack of vitamins in her daily diet. He'd seen those exact toxic markings just one time before. And back then, he learned way too late what they signified. He pushed into the service hallway, pressing his back flat against the cold wall. His breathing stayed perfectly calm. He was completely alone in that back corridor. So what do you and I take from this? The experts missed the clues, but our observant janitor instantly knew the terrifying diagnosis. A dangerous truth he dreaded carrying. Measlines, named for some old Dutch doctor. You only see them in heavy metal poisoning cases. Thallium mainly, sometimes arsenic if you look closely. The white bands form when the body dumps that metal into the nail's keratin matrix during high exposure spikes. Multiple evenly spaced stripes, that meant multiple toxic exposures. It pointed to a deliberate pattern, not some random accident. I had also noticed the wealthy CEO's hair. Her $100 million in advanced treatments totally missed it. But my trained eyes caught every detail. It was thinning bilaterally along her temporal line, a quiet, diffuse shedding. That symmetric loss screams systemic toxic insult, not just the usual stress of aging. Then there was her hand, the right one specifically. Its resting tone just looked subtly wrong to my eyes. Just a fractional mismatch between how her fingers rested and what real relaxation actually looks like. Early-stage peripheral neuropathy. The type that starts without pain, just the body quietly failing to obey its own basic commands. Now connect those 3 tiny clues. For a VIP dropping millions on IV treatments, they pointed one way. Not toward that rare autoimmune disorder her high-paid doctors stamped on her chart. They pointed toward something wearing the exact same mask, but completely different underneath. I pushed my squeaky cart to the elevator and hit the button for the basement. Riding that dark box down, my mind drifted straight back to Margaret. That night, Grace fell asleep at 8:30, a book open across her chest. I carefully moved it over to the nightstand. I sat on the edge of her bed for a second, then headed to the kitchen. I didn't make any food. I reached above the fridge and pulled down a dusty cardboard box I hadn't touched in 14 months. Inside, strapped with a rubber band in a manila folder, were Margaret's old medical files. I slid down to the kitchen floor, resting my back against the refrigerator, and read the pages in order for the 3rd time in 2 years. The official diagnoses, the treatment protocols. The lab values her top specialists waved off as adjustment responses, blaming rare presentations and complex autoimmune diseases instead of looking closer. I finally found the page I'd marked with a torn scrap of paper towel. The autopsy toxicology addendum, filed 6 weeks after Margaret passed away by a pathologist who never even met her, so he had zero reason to soften his findings. Thallium sulfate levels inside her liver tissue, highly elevated. Source of exposure, undetermined, completely undetermined. Because by that point, nobody was bothering to look for a source. Because by then, there wasn't a living patient left to protect. I called Dr. Diana Frost at 11:14. Just like always at that late hour, she was still sitting at her fancy desk. She had been the lead attending internist during Margaret's final hospital run. She never ordered that simple heavy metal test that could have caught it in time. She carried that massive regret with the unique burden that high-status physicians bear. You know the type. Unacknowledged professionally, but never privately forgotten. Listen to this. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. I described the CEO's fingernails. 3 horizontal bands, perfectly spaced, maybe 2 millimeters wide, sitting right at the base, not mid-nail. I explained the hair loss pattern I'd spotted whenever the clinic lights caught her pulled back hair at an angle, widespread thinning, but completely even on both sides. Perfectly uniform along her temples. I broke down the neurological issues in her right hand. It wasn't exactly a tremor, more like an unnatural twitch, pointing straight to peripheral nerve damage. Diana stayed dead silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. Those bands on her nails, if they're even. That proves repeated exposure, running on a very tight schedule. Not some random clinic contamination, not a one-time accident. Silence. Listen to me. If you're right and the treatments are Someone is intentionally giving her this. I already knew that. I knew it the second my brain connected the dots in that hallway, but hearing it out loud in her careful, measured voice made it terrifyingly real, a lot worse than just keeping it in my head. I stared down at the medical schedule I'd secretly snapped from the whiteboard in the nurse's station 3 weeks ago when I was swapping a ceiling panel above it. 19 sessions in 11 months. The gaps 17 days, 18 days, 17 days, 17 days. Clockwork, regular as a calendar. I set the phone down on the kitchen floor and just sat there, listening to Grace breathing in our quiet house. The city hummed its steady, low frequency right through the walls of the back bedroom. Think about that with me. This dying CEO was paying a massive fortune to be poisoned. I pictured over $100 million flowing right into the hands of the guy holding the syringe. I pictured Margaret fading away inside a sterile white room while highly paid experts just nodded and used fancy jargon. I wasn't going to just nod anymore. The very next morning, I asked for 5 minutes with the nursing supervisor up on 14. Patricia was her name. She'd been with the healthcare company longer than most of the wealthy executives. She heard me out with the blank, practiced patience of someone formally trained to handle complaints. And when I finally finished laying out exactly what I saw, she looked back, zero hesitation, and said, "Mr. Calloway, our elite medical team brings over 2 decades of top-tier specialty experience. I'm certain we can trust them to handle the clinical side of things." She delivered that line the way powerful people do when they're shutting you down completely. I tracked down Dr. Dominic Hale in the 14th floor hallway right at 8:40. He was breezing between rooms with the arrogant strut of a guy who's never been late once. I called his name once and the doctor spun around. He gave me 45 seconds, hands resting at his sides, face totally blank, wearing that professional mask. Then he simply said, "I appreciate your concern. We have 23 specialists actively monitoring Miss Chase's case. I am absolutely confident we're managing this appropriately." He walked away without looking back, but we know better. I stood right there in the hallway in my gray uniform. Laminated badge, mop cart, completely swallowed by the architecture of this wildly expensive building rising up all around me. I kept my mouth shut, nothing to say yet. I stared down at my own hands. These same hands used to stabilize cervical spines, start intravenous lines in the back of rolling ambulances, hold heavy pressure on bleeding wounds that nobody should have ever survived. These hands held Margaret's on those dark nights when she was simply too exhausted to speak. I had been told, indirectly and right out, by nurses, receptionists, hospital administrators, and lately by some suit in a tailored jacket. They all said my experience meant nothing. I ate my lunch down in the basement cafeteria, sitting alone at a corner table, the heating and cooling system humming overhead, just staring at a single sheet of paper on my tray. I had jotted down 3 phrases in my tiny, careful handwriting. Me's lines, thallium poisoning. Repeated exposure, scheduled source, then my phone vibrated. Grace sent a quick photo from school, a brand new drawing. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded the paper, tucked it into my breast pocket right beside Tuesday's crayon drawing, and finally got to my feet. For the next 2 days, you and I both know how this goes. A guy pushing a mop becomes completely invisible. And I weaponized that invisibility. With the quiet patience of someone who truly understood where the real advantage was. Never in being seen, it was about being everywhere without anyone ever noticing. I noticed those red biohazard bags coming from the 14th floor treatment suite weren't going through the building's normal regulated medical waste system at all. They were grabbed separately, late at night, by some courier van with absolutely no hospital logos on it. I wrote down the vehicle. The identification number and the company name slapped on that cheap magnetic door placard. Regulated medical waste needs a strict chain, specific carriers, detailed paperwork, and clear disposal logs. This sketchy van had none of those things. It rolled up, collected, and vanished in 15 minutes, way outside the standard check-in hours for building contractors. I discreetly photographed the intravenous solution bags they were using for Evelyn Chase's treatments. I did it during a normal sweep of the prep room while the nurses were distracted doing shift handover. The main label looked pharmaceutical standard, but right underneath, just peeking out at the edge where the glue wasn't completely flush, was a totally different label. The lot number on that hidden bottom label was a format I just didn't recognize, missing the required manufacturer code, the kind legally mandated for any approved intravenous medication sold in this country. I had seen enough, checked enough drug labels in my EMT years to know what a compliant one looked like. This definitely was not one. By day 3, I was pushing my trash cart through the underground parking garage when I heard voices echoing from the far end. I kept moving slowly the way I always did, never changing my pace or shifting direction. Logan Hargrove stood next to a gray sedan, his expensive jacket buttoned tight, his voice kept low. Dominic Hale was facing him down. I caught exactly 4 sentences before their voices vanished under the hum of the parking garage. I overheard them. She's asking about next quarter. A pause. They needed 3 more months at minimum. Then keep the treatment protocol exactly as it is. I watched Logan give a tight nod, confirming a shady agreement he never wanted written down. That evening I sent the IV label photo to Diana Frost using an encrypted messaging app she used for highly sensitive medical patient situations. Her reply buzzed at 2:17 in the morning. I woke up, reading her message while sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark. Stick with me here. She ran that lot number through 3 different pharmaceutical databases. It didn't exist in a single one of them. The manufacturer code wasn't registered with any medical board overseeing those intravenous treatments. Whatever was in that IV bag had never been approved for human use by anyone. I sat there in the dark, then I texted back 2 simple words. What next? Her response came instantly, like she was waiting for me. I need a blood sample, drawn outside of their corrupt medical laboratory system. If the thallium poison is there, it's completely measurable. That is concrete evidence they can't deny. Can you get it for me? I thought about it. I had keys to the 14th floor. My daily maintenance route put me in her corridor way before the fancy doctors arrived every morning. And I had one quiet thing no medical degree, huge salary, or institutional authority could ever manufacture. I had worked that hallway for 9 months, and CEO Evelyn Chase knew my face. Not my background or my job title, just my face. She had glanced my way without a second thought dozens of times. But she never looked straight through me, like those doctors did. You and I know what that meant. One single window. 6:15 Wednesday morning, 20 minutes. I was either going to risk it or walk away. I stood in the corridor at 6:08, waiting. At 6:13, the elevator opened. Evelyn Chase stepped out holding coffee and the calm energy of a woman who had carved out this exact 20-minute gap from her brutal schedule just to survive. She was completely alone. She walked to the corner office, turned her key in the lock, and then, because I hadn't moved an inch from my spot, she looked up and noticed me. "Mr. Calloway," she said. She remembered my name after all. "Good morning." I didn't step toward her at all. "I need to speak with you about something that has nothing to do with building maintenance." She just stared at me for 1 full second. Then she opened the door. "Come in." I refused to sit down. I stood by the window, set my phone on her desk, and showed her the photos of those IV labels. The phony lot number that simply didn't exist. The license plates from that shady midnight pickup. Now look closely. My timeline matched the tiny poison lines I'd noticed on her fingernails. I described those Mies lines exactly like I'd report a broken valve in the basement. Specific, sequential, and completely objective. Look closely with me. 3 bands perfectly spaced, pointing to repeated thallium poisoning every 17 to 18 days. It matched her treatment schedule exactly. Evelyn Chase stayed completely quiet while I laid it out. At some point, she set her coffee down on the desk, and she never reached for it again. When I finished explaining, she just stared at her hands. She turned them over slowly against the polished wood surface, palms facing up then down, examining her nails with the sharp focus of someone seeing a familiar part of themselves completely differently. A heavy silence hung in the room. "Why you?" she finally asked. It wasn't an insult at all. It was a completely honest question. "Because I lost someone," I told her, "to the exact same thing no one caught early enough." She looked right at me, not at my uniform, not at my badge or the mop cart out in the hall, just at me. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "A blood draw," I replied, "totally outside their system." I know a doctor I trust to run an independent analysis. If I am wrong, I walk away and you never see me again." Evelyn stood up. She walked over to her desk, opened the bottom left drawer, and pulled out a sealed clinical kit. Tourniquet, needle collection tubes, and alcohol swabs. It was a real physician-grade kit, the kind medical students carry. She placed it on the desk and spoke. "I spent 2 years in medical school before my father's diagnosis. I kept this because I never really bought into the idea that I should be completely dependent on somebody else for basic clinical procedures." She stopped talking. "I have been asking myself the exact same question since month 8. She drew the sample herself, super steady and efficient. Her old medical training was still active in her muscle memory. I labeled the tubes exactly how Diana had taught me. I was out of her office by 6:32. The hallway was totally dead. Nobody had noticed me go in, nobody saw me leave either. Diana got the blood samples before noon. She ran the heavy metal toxicity test twice. The reading was identical both times, 37 micrograms per liter. The normal upper limit for workplace exposure was just 2. You and I both know this wasn't random. The level in Evelyn's blood wasn't from an accidental spill or environmental issue. It was the clear result of sustained, regular, highly deliberate administration of a compound that had absolutely no business being inside any intravenous bag. Diana then tested the liquid from the IV bag I photographed using a portable, high-tech spectrometry unit she kept at her clinic for field toxicology cases. She found thallium acetate at a massive concentration, enough to cause the exact neurological symptoms the CEO had been suffering from. It was perfectly soluble, colorless, and odorless. A doctor could slip it into a clear IV bag without changing the fluid's appearance at all. It would trigger symptoms identical to the rare autoimmune neurological illness that Dr. Dominic Hale had been treating for 11 months. The feedback loop was fully closed now. The brutal logic was cold and plain. Keep the patient sick enough to need constant medical care, but well enough to keep paying. Look at the motive with me. $100 million in 11 months, plus millions more if the fake treatments dragged into next year. Which those protocols always did. Evelyn got that full toxicology report around 11:40 that night. She sat alone in her office, reading it twice, right in the very chair where she'd sat for 19 infusions of the poison making her sick. She didn't shed a tear. She stepped into her private executive bathroom, just staring into that mirror for a long, quiet minute. Her hair was noticeably thinning at the temples. Dark shadows hung under her eyes, bags that definitely weren't there 2 years back. You and I know that look. The cold clarity of someone finally holding the ugly truth after months of perfectly crafted lies. She remembered her dad's messages after every single earnings call. All that pride, all that trust. She thought about the healthcare company her grandfather had originally started. In a building a quarter the size of this, built on the belief that medicine serves patients first and everything else comes second. She thought about 11 long months. Sitting right there, actually believing her fading health was just the process. That she was healing, just because some silver-haired guy with a Harvard degree swore to it. With the smug confidence of someone who never expected anyone to look closer. Then she squared her shoulders, marched right back to her executive desk, and grabbed her phone. She immediately dialed her private legal counsel. Next, she called the head of internal security. She ordered both of them to show up bright and early that Monday morning. By Sunday evening, they pulled the complete 14th floor security archive. 11 months of backup footage, sitting quietly on a secure server, was finally getting the close look it deserved. The clips were clear, time-stamped, and absolutely undeniable. Dr. Dominic Hale, standing alone in the prep room way past 10 p.m. Always the exact night before Evelyn's big scheduled treatment sessions. Slipping some unknown liquid from his locked private case straight into her main IV bag. 19 times, 19 nights, every single one caught on tape. The financial forensics took a bit longer, but not much. Stick with me here. Logan Hargrove hid those payments well, but he missed the small details. 14 different transfers over 11 months, all from a medical holding. Money washed through 2 shell accounts, landing right in Dominic Hale's personal asset firm. $4.3 million. Logged in the records as payments for so-called consulting services. But there was no actual consulting. Just a sick CEO in a chair and a clear bag of tainted fluid, plus a locked doctor's case that nobody bothered to question, except me. I got a text message from Evelyn at 3:04 Monday morning. It said, "You were right, all of it. Meeting at 7 a.m. Monday. I need you there." I just set my phone face down on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of my bed in the pitch black, thinking about Margaret. I kept picturing that small cardboard box hidden in my kitchen cabinet. 18 months of people just nodding and blindly trusting the experts. You see where blindly following those big authoritative voices gets us, right? It leaves you with a manila folder claiming undetermined chemical exposure. I wasn't angry exactly. I felt something quieter and way more permanent than anger. I became a version of myself that had been waiting without even knowing it. Waiting for the chance to close a loop that never should have been opened. I walked down to Grace's room and just stood in the doorway for a while. My daughter was sleeping on her side, arms wrapped tight around a stuffed animal. Her breathing was slow and even in the dark. I realized she'd spent half her life in a household completely shaped by loss. Not bitterly, not obviously, but structurally. Like a house on shifting ground, developing small, hidden cracks you only notice once you start looking. She deserved a dad who hadn't given up. I thought I might finally be that. Walk with me. That Monday meeting convened at 7 sharp. The 15th floor boardroom was packed with a full roster of corporate directors. We had the external legal team, plus 2 guys from internal corporate security, and 2 plainclothes private investigators from a firm hired over the weekend. I stood right against the wall by the windows, wearing my gray uniform. Just my maintenance lanyard. The wealthy CEO, Evelyn Chase, had told me to be there, and I honestly had nowhere else to be. Logan Hargrove walked in, carrying his briefcase and that fake attentiveness. He froze the second he spotted the investigators. Dr. Dominic Hale stepped in 30 seconds later and quickly scanned the boardroom. He forced his face into a neutral expression that didn't quite pull it off. Logan glared at me standing by the wall, speaking like a man calling out a totally glaring procedural mistake. "Why is maintenance staff in this meeting?" Evelyn, sitting quietly at the head of the table, just said he was invited. She said it without even turning her head. "Let's review the facts." She presented everything exactly how I'd shown her, sequentially, with zero drama. Letting the hard data carry the weight. The serum toxicology, the advanced treatment analysis, the security footage. It all played silently on the boardroom's main screen. There was Dominic at the prep counter after 10 p.m., holding an unlabeled vial, the careful hands of a guy who thought he was alone. The hidden financial records. The money transfers lined up with her treatment calendar, so perfectly it needed zero explanation. Dominic denied it initially, but when the footage hit the 4th clip, he just stopped. Logan violently pushed his chair back and stood up. Instantly, one of the private investigators placed a hand on his shoulder. Not aggressive, just the firm grip of a hand that absolutely wasn't going to move. Nobody shouted, not a single person made a speech. I had built that case specifically to eliminate the need for speeches. The boardroom stayed dead quiet while the security footage kept playing. And in that heavy silence, I noticed something. Every single person was glued to the screen, except for Dominic and Logan. They stared at the table, and Evelyn Chase, she was looking right at me. "So what do we learn here?" I met her eyes briefly, then the moment passed and the room began unwinding. Just lawyers talking to lawyers. I watched the security team move in. They had that quiet efficiency of people executing a locked-in plan. I just pushed my cart back, giving them room to work. Dominic Hale got escorted right off the 14th floor that afternoon. Logan Hargrove's access to corporate systems was suspended pending formal internal investigation. All regulatory referrals were filed before the close of business. Dr. Diana Frost was brought in as an independent consultant overseeing Evelyn's detox protocol. They started her first truly clean thallium chelation infusion, fully standardized, documented, sourced from a licensed medical manufacturer with a traceable lot number, kicking off Thursday. You and I know healing hurts. That first week was honestly harder than the 11 months prior. The chelation mobilized all that accumulated heavy metal, and her body reacted exactly as bodies do when they finally start clearing a massive, long-standing toxic burden, crushing fatigue. deep, agonizing discomfort, with a harsh temporary spike in symptoms before the turn. Evelyn sat there in that same treatment suite chair. She never once pretended it was an easy fight. But then came the 8th day. I watched her walk from the parking garage to the front doors under her own power. No one supporting her arm, no more overly careful pacing from someone running on completely empty reserves. It was a distance of maybe 40 meters across open pavement in the crisp autumn air. She walked it like someone fully expecting to arrive. I found the envelope sitting right on my cleaning cart a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later. Just a standard business envelope with my name written, handwritten across the front. I recognized her exact script from that message she had sent at 3 in the morning. Inside was a 2-page letter, completely handwritten on her heavy personal corporate stationery. I stood right there in the hallway and read it. She talked about those 11 months. She described exactly what it felt like to be the smartest CEO in the room, yet simultaneously the most deeply deceived person there. She explained how she had spent 2 full years in medical school and 11 brutal months as a patient, yet neither experience had taught her the simple truth I had spotted in 40 seconds, just glancing through a treatment room window. You might be wondering the same thing she did. She finally understood why I spotted the truth, while those highly paid experts remained totally blind. The second page held a formal job offer for me, Director of Medical Safety Operations, a brand new executive role inside the company's internal compliance structure, giving me independent oversight of all clinical protocols, medical vendor verification, and patient safety review. It was, she explicitly wrote, not a reward. It was simply an acknowledgement that the role had already existed in practice for 9 months. I just hadn't received a title or proper salary matching the oversight work I was actually doing. I quietly folded her letter. I tucked it in my pocket. Because you and I know what matters. It sat alongside the crayon drawing where Grace told me I fixed people. I finished my cleaning route, grabbed my things from the basement locker room when my shift finally ended. I walked out into the crisp afternoon and caught the subway down to the Maple Street Early Learning Center, where my Grace was waiting on the front step, wearing her backpack and clutching a folded sheet of paper she had been proudly holding since 3:30. "It's a new one," she said, handing it over before he could even speak. He slowly unfolded it on the sidewalk. A tall building, 2 little figures at the top, one big, one small. Below them, scribbled crayon ground and sky. And at the bottom, written in the careful blocky letters of a 7-year-old just realizing that words leave a permanent mark on the world. She had proudly written, "Dad fixed the person." He crouched down and held his little girl. For a long moment on the sidewalk, with afternoon traffic blurring past and the city just doing what cities do around the heavy gravity of one tiny detail that matters completely. You and I know he didn't need fancy credentials or hospital authority. No, he fixed her, by relying on the one simple tool that never failed. Even during those painful years, he tried to brush it aside, a stubborn refusal to ignore the tiny details proving her body was telling the truth, speaking a quiet language that costs absolutely nothing to learn but everything to overlook. He slowly stood up, taking Grace's hand. Together, they headed toward the busy subway entrance. The late afternoon sun cast long straight lines across the dirty sidewalk. And for the first time in forever, you could tell he wasn't a man walking blindly in the wrong direction. $100 million hadn't answered the question. An unseen janitor with a mop cart carrying his own quiet grief had asked it instead. Think about it. He simply chose to notice the smallest things and spoke up plainly about what he saw. He achieved the exact miracle all that CEO wealth couldn't. He simply arrived in time.